If it's Thursday, another ethics controversy hits the Supreme Court. Calls for accountability grow amid new reporting that a conservative billionaire megadonor wasn't just treating Justice Clarence Thomas to luxurious vacations. He wasn't just paying a salary to his wife. He was also paying the tuition for one of his closest family members. Plus, policing the AI revolution. Top tech execs are called to the White House as the Biden administration rushes to address artificial intelligence and the new security risks it poses before it's too late. But is it? And a federal jury finds 4 out of 5 former Proud Boys members guilty of the charge of seditious conspiracy for their actions tied to the insurrection at the Capitol, including the far-right group's former leader. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting in Washington. We're going to begin today with the crisis of confidence, the highest levels of our government, a system too broken by hyper-partisanship to dole out any real accountability. New reporting from ProPublica today reveals yet another troubling financial arrangement between Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his conservative billionaire mega-donor friend Harlan Crow. ProPublica is now reporting, in addition to the luxury vacations they previously reported on, in addition to the nonprofit group Crow funded that paid Ginny Thomas a salary, in addition to buying the home of Clarence Thomas's mother, Harlan Crow is also paying school tuition for a close family member of the Thomases, who he was raising as a son. They had essentially adopted him, raising him in their own house. The price tag on those tuition payments could be as high as $150,000. Thomas has never mentioned the tuition payments in his federal disclosures, though ProPublica notes that he once did disclose a smaller $5,000 gift from another friend that indeed did go towards the tuition. This new reporting is just the latest in a long string of stories about the political and financial entanglements of both Justice Thomas and his wife Ginny Thomas. Everything, as I noted, from accepting luxury vacations, rides in private jets, to Ginny Thomas's conservative political activism and funding from big money donors. And these are just the latest credibility issues facing this conservative court. After years of partisan nominations, confirmation controversies, an extraordinarily unpopular abortion ruling, and the leak of that ruling, and today we heard some rare bipartisan agreement in the halls of Congress that the Supreme Court has a reputation problem, a big one. Take a listen.
The perception of the American people is important to me, and I do think that there's work that the Supreme Court should do to address those perception problems. You know, the Article 1, Article 2 branch is always going to have politics driving people's perceptions of ethics, but in the Article 3 branch, that one needs to be the gold standard, and they've got work to do.
I hope that Chief Justice Roberts reads this story this morning and understands something has to be done. The reputation of the Supreme Court is at stake here. The credibility of the court when it comes to its future decisions is at stake. And his reputation as the leader of this court is really an issue as well.
But on the question of what to do about it, lawmakers retreat to their familiar partisan corners. On the questions facing Justice Thomas, here are Republican senators forcefully defending this egregious behavior at a recent hearing on a potential code of ethics for the court.
This assault on Justice Thomas is well beyond ethics. It is about trying to delegitimize a conservative court that was appointed through the traditional process.
This is all just a thuggish shakedown. Nice Supreme Court you've got there, America. Sure would be a shame if something happened to it.
Democrats can have disagreements based on law. But this attempt to delegitimize the court, this attempt to personally smear Clarence Thomas is dishonest, and everyone in the media echoing it is participating in a shameful reprise of 1991's high-tech lynching.
Just ask yourself this. Imagine the reaction from those same very senators. If a liberal justice was accused of taking money from a donor, let's say George Soros, and he was paying the tuition of, say, the niece of Sonia Sotomayor. Ask yourself what the reaction would be. You have to, and it's fair to ask, would Democrats be as forceful in their calls for accountability if it were a liberal justice that were as compromised as Clarence Thomas clearly is? Folks, now more than ever, and particularly on the right, the political jersey color seems to be the ultimate insulation from accountability in government. So many people on the right now say, yeah, but the left is more crooked, so it's okay if the crooked ones are on our side. And any way you look at it, the hyperpartisanship of our politics has led to this crisis of accountability across virtually all branches of government. Nobody trusts any investigation coming out of that Capitol building that's next door to us. Joining me now is NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. So, Laura, it is a very opaque building, the Supreme Court. It's in a very opaque branch of government. Justice Roberts had a chance. He was invited to testify to the Senate Judiciary Committee. He declined. He is, on one hand, supposedly worried about the credibility of the court, and on the other hand, has been very hesitant to even embrace or at least accept the premise that the court has a perception problem.
Yeah, his general position on this, Chuck, has been the court knows what it's doing. Just trust us. We're good at policing ourselves. We look to the ethics code that doesn't apply to us the way it applies to every other federal judge on the bench for guidance. But given our unique role in the constitutional system, there is no ethics role for the outsiders to look at for us. And so basically just allow us to keep doing what we're doing has been his general position thus far. The question is whether there's going to be enough public political pressure that the court eventually feels that they actually have to do something to maintain any shred of accountability and credibility. Is there any, the Supreme Court justices, all 9 of them signed that letter last week. Yeah. I mean, you just have to wonder, the other 8 got to be sitting there, are they thinking there, but for the grace of God go they? Or are any of them at all concerned about the tarnish? I mean, this is a cancer on the Supreme Court now. It's a full-on cancer. Yeah. Right. And so I think there's a couple things going on. One, I think the disclosure rules have allowed all of them not to be nearly as transparent as I think the American people would want to see. The issue, though, with Clarence Thomas and Harlan Crow is, I think, materially different. And it does appear that what's happening there is unusual, and the amount of financial entanglements between them, as you reported, Chuck, not only just the gifts and the jets and all of the opulence, but now down to the tuition payments and Ginny Thomas's salary. Like, it's just, there's so much there that I do think that is materially different than what you've seen from some of the other justices. What would happen if a circuit court judge had these kind of failed to disclose these arrangements? They would be investigated. There's a process for that is very unlike what the Supreme Court has to go through, which is nothing, right? So every other judge would be subject to an investigation, and it would be onerous. And there's a general principle that federal judges are supposed to avoid any appearance of impropriety, which means even putting aside the disclosure issue and why or not he didn't disclose these payments. The idea is there that in order for the public to have trust in the court and believe in this institution, you would want to avoid any appearance of anything that looks at all questionable. And the question is, why doesn't Clarence Thomas or any other justice want to hold themselves to that same standard, even if they're not technically under the same set of rules? Right. Well, if we can't expect ethical conduct by the highest court in the land, how does anybody expect ethical conduct from any elected official in the land? It's a rhetorical question, Laura. I'm not going to make you answer that. But anyway, Laura Jarrett, our legal correspondent. Laura, thank you. Let me bring in tonight's panel. Asma Khalid, NPR White House correspondent. Maria Teresa Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino, NBC News contributor. And Doug Heye, Republican strategist and former communications director for the RNC. Asma, I want to put up a little chart of the Supreme Court's poll numbers. I want to show you something. In 2002, 2 years after the single most controversial thing a Supreme Court has ever done, decide the outcome of a presidential election, half the country had a great deal or quite a bit of confidence in the Supreme Court. So that's why I want to put that in context. 2002, 2 years after the single most political decision they ever made, divisive decision they ever made, arguably, and they had a 50% essentially confidence rating. It's cut in half 20 years later. In half. At some point, Chief Justice Roberts, who I think we all believe wants to improve the perception of the court, needs to step up.
I mean, I do think these numbers are very challenging. Our own polling, too, NPR, PBS NewsHour, Marist did a poll, too, very similar results that people have very little, I think as a majority of the public has very little confidence in the Supreme Court. Look, I mean, I think the challenge for the Chief Justice, though, is that ultimately, I mean, these are public perception problems, and the court has been, I think, immune by nature, given who and what the court is from responding to public pressure and public perception. So how does he invade and step into that territory now? I really don't know. I mean, the court has never had to be answerable to the public.
You know, Doug, I think if the Republicans want to be taken seriously in their investigations into the Bidens, they got to take this seriously. And obviously, we know Jersey color indicates that won't be the case.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Right.
And everything that you laid out was defined in your earlier intro, where you talked about the tribalism and the jersey color wearing. And that's ultimately it. And it's why we see, even after Bush versus Gore, the numbers of the court falling, because every justice is illegitimate if they're not your justice.
Guess what the biggest difference, though, I would argue, between 2002 and now? Back then, we knew it took 60 votes to get a justice in the Supreme Court. And there's something about that. I do think we have politicized and polarized the entire judiciary by lowering it to 50 because it's a different kind of judge that gets nominated now, Doug.
Sure.
I've talked to old folks in White House counsel's office. Bush's White House counsel once said, oh, if it was 50 votes, we'd have an entirely different set of people we would have nominated.
Yeah, absolutely. It changes the complete dynamic, but we still go back to that place of my justice is amazing and your justice is illegitimate. And we see that infecting our politics. Everything is tribal, and the Hunter Biden comparison, I think, is apt.
Maria Teresa?
So I think part of the challenge is that you also have on the backdrop, you're increasingly seeing receipts of Clarence Thomas and wrongdoing, and Justice Roberts not saying, you know what, we are going to hold ourselves to a higher standard because our institutions are vulnerable right now. And I think that's what you were alluding to, Chuck. Our institutions of governance, people's trust in the system. But at the same time, what we have is a court that is increasingly dictating and legislating because we have a dysfunction in Congress. So instead of Congress legislating a woman's right to choose, we're expecting the court to do that, which is not where it was meant to be. And I think it's the juxtaposition of, one, people saying it's not my justice because of what you're saying regarding the 50-50. Two is we're finding receipts of corruption. And three, the court's has changed in the way they determine really big issues that were once relegated to Congress.
And this is something that I do think we're asking for the Senate to be outraged. I think we should be outraged. The United States Senate created this catastrophe. They are the creators of this catastrophe. And if the Republicans want to blame Harry Reid and the Democrats want to blame Ben McConnell, great. You collectively have destroyed the judiciary branch.
I think that's an excellent point, right? That there is some, and I think your point was exactly right. When you lower the threshold of the number of senators who have to approve a justice, you are going to require less bipartisanship to likely get a justice through. Look, I mean, I don't think those rules in the Senate are changing anytime soon. I think the reality is right now, I don't mean to be so negative about this, but I don't entirely see a pathway out.
That's what's so frustrating about it, Asma. I mean, I am just genuinely, as a citizen, just frustrated and angry. I don't understand. You know, if I'd be fired for behaving this way, this man is a Supreme Court justice. I mean, this is embarrassing to the United States of America.
But that's exactly what the public should be outraged around. And that's where Justice Roberts says, you know what, you're actually right. We have to clean up house.
The regular person would be treated differently, Doug, and that is what's happening now.
Well, and even the regular member of Congress would be treated differently. The rules
Members
and
of Congress are going to jail.
Right.
Some of them did. Chris Collins for special treatment. Whatever you think
Traffic camp back in the day. Yeah.
You know, they're held accountable, at least in some form.
In some form. And look, you know, we still have some members of Congress who haven't gotten through that process yet. Obviously, George Santos being a good example. But these are credible questions that have been coming up. And the one question I do have, and I've said this is legitimate in Clarence Thomas for a long time. Clarence Thomas is getting a lot more attention than 8 other justices. You know, Chief Justice Roberts is getting questions about the larger court. And I don't think we know. Is this specifically a Clarence Thomas question, which is a problem? Is this a larger question and not a perception problem for the court, but a substantive problem for the court?
I would argue the Clarence Thomas thing is actually, it is bigger because you do have a spouse who's a political activist.
Right.
I mean, Asma, this is something we have not seen before.
It isn't, and it's something that you see in, I would say, a number of other countries. And the United States often holds itself up to this very high standard in terms of the responsibility of its judiciary. And there is, I think, a sense of it, you could say whether it's deserved or not, but an entitlement, right, in terms of our institutions being so
We're
beyond
better than
reproach.
Everybody else.
Right, and these are the things that you see in all, I mean, I think anyone who has immigrant roots will say, like, this reminds you of what you see in other countries.
But we also know what happens with the deterioration of those institutions in other countries. And that's why we are the beacon of making sure that we are a standard bearer, not just for the United States, but worldwide.
And the single most important of those 3 institutions is the judiciary branch, because that's what sort of keeps us all on the on this wobbly level playing field. It's not
Same
level.
sandbox.
It's a little wobbly, but it kind of sort of has kept us a little bit above the fray compared to everybody else. Not anymore.
No, and look, how many times have we had the conversation of what conservatives say publicly and privately about Donald Trump? Those conversations are happening right now in the same level.
Oh, about Clarence Thomas?
Absolutely.
Everybody knows this is egregious behavior. They just can't get caught saying it.
I don't know. I mean, you tell me the thing about it. I don't know why conservatives. I mean, the conversation of not saying it publicly. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are political calculations as to why.
It's a zero-sum game. All of our politics are a zero-sum game.
Yeah, but I guess to what end?
But Maria
right?
Teresa,
but to what end?
But the Biden crime family.
Right.
Like, that is going to be the retort by many people on the right.
Right, but I do think that if we recognize that our democracy is in a vulnerable position, Chuck. We recognize that the judiciary is the one that allows us to play equally in the same sandbox. If we don't hold it accountable, we are actually unraveling this incredible country. And that's what the problem is. And that's where Justice Roberts really needs to recognize, is it party or country? And I would encourage him to consider country above all else.
I mean, I do think the polarization, though, to me, is it symptomatic or is it actually the cause, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time.
I think it's the cause, yeah, I know.
Right? You talk about, look at the House districts. Look at how uncompetitive pretty much any House district is now compared to where it was 30 years ago, right?
It's the incentive structures, right? If what it takes to win is to win a moderate, you're moderator. If what it takes to win is to be MAGA, you're MAGA-weight, right? I mean, it is.
And there's very few districts where you actually have to be moderate.
Every incentive structure is for partisan hackery. I'm sorry.
But the court should not be.
But we just did it by lowering. Again, this is where I put it at the feet of the United States Senate.
No, that's where the argument that a lifetime appointment should get rid of all the politics. But what have we learned? It doesn't.
Not if you play by these set of rules.
Right. If there's no accountability at the very end, and I think that's the challenge, is that there's no accountability for crossing the line of corruption. That's a shame.
All right, Doug, Maria Teresa, Asma, this was quite not uplifting. Anyway, coming up, speaking of uplifting, AI fears. Top tech execs meet with top Biden administration officials as the White House attempts to find some ways to rein in a potentially perilous technology. I'll talk to the White House science advisor who called these executive steps, who helped design these executive steps next. Plus, the former leader of the far-right Proud Boys group has been found guilty of seditious conspiracy. It's a landmark verdict in a January 6th trial. We'll have details on them for all 5 members ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The White House is now signaling its support for some rules and regulations surrounding the launch, if you will, of artificial intelligence as the new technology begins to disrupt a number of industries, with some experts warning can end up wreaking havoc on society if not properly constrained. The Biden administration hosted a meeting today with a number of big tech executives to discuss the risks posed by AI while also discussing potential safeguards. In a statement, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who took part in the meeting, warned that AI has the, quote, potential to dramatically increase threats to safety and security, infringe on civil rights and privacy, and erode public trust and faith in democracy. Not exactly uplifting. Today's meeting comes days after the so-called godfather of AI says he left Google to more freely speak out about the dangers the technology can pose. In addition to security concerns from AI, there's also the potentially wide-scale disruption it could have on all sorts of issues, but of course, first and foremost might be the job market. In fact, Hollywood screenwriters are striking right now, in part over worries that AI could be used to take their jobs. Hey, ChatGPT, write a sitcom in the mind of Larry David, right? IBM says it could use the technology to replace nearly 8,000 jobs at the company. And a new report from the World Economic Forum finds that nearly a quarter of all jobs are set to be disrupted in the next 5 years, with AI playing a key role. Of course, the same thing was said at the advent of the internet. Should that give us comfort or not? Joining me now is Arati Prabhakar, Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. More importantly, she's a veteran of DARPA, which of course essentially gave the world the internet. And so she joins us now. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. Ms. Prabhakar, let me start with what these rules do and what don't they do. It feels like this is just a set of guidelines. Is that fair?
The president and the vice president met today with the 4 CEOs of leading AI companies And that was to underscore what the Biden-Harris administration has focused on from the beginning, which is the idea that AI is a very powerful technology, that if we're going to seize its benefits, we have to start by managing its risks. And this meeting was to focus on the company's responsibilities in that regard. That's an important part of getting to a future with responsible AI.
Most of these companies believe they should be trusted. Why should we trust them?
Well, I think that they have such an important role to play because they are driving this technology. They're putting it out into the world. And that's one part of what needs to happen. This administration from the beginning, before this wave of AI happened, has been on the job putting out a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights last fall. And we've announced a set of actions. You'll see more from us, but this particular meeting was about making sure that the companies are responsible for their role.
Again, how do you ensure that the companies are responsible? I mean, thanks to Section 230, they really have no liability on AI yet, should they?
You may have seen an announcement last week from 4 major enforcement agencies, EEOC, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, Department of Justice, the FTC, reminding companies that they're going to be holding them accountable even as they start to use AI. And I think that's a great example of using existing laws and making sure that companies understand that they're responsible, that they are still on the line. There's much more to do, but I think that's an important example of
you don't think Section
happening.
230 will protect them from regulation and civil rights violations that a machine may make?
I think we have to step back for a minute and look at this technology because it is so broad and so powerful. I think there will be issues to resolve about Section 230, but this technology is about what content gets generated, but it's also about many other uses and many other risks. So that is one part, but it's a much more broader and a much more complex landscape.
Go back in time for me a little bit. If we had the same fear about social media that we all do right now about AI, would a meeting like this have happened 15 years ago, and should it have with social media?
I think we all believe there's a lot to be learned from the social media generation. And of course, what's happened with social media is an example of artificial intelligence that's already in our lives, because when you get an ad targeted to you, or when you do a search, or even if you're using facial recognition to unlock your phone, those are examples of AI today. What's happening now is this much more powerful wave of AI that's going to have broader applications. It's going to come into Americans' lives in more and more ways. And this is really why the president's been clear from the beginning that if we're going to seize its benefits, we have got to start by managing its risks.
Let me ask you this. These tech companies, they don't have too many conversations about the morality of some of the things they're making and the ethics of what they're making. Where do those conversations come in, and who should play that role?
What I find is everyone who's involved in the business of AI understands the bright side, but also these very concerning risks. And the issue is, what are each of us going to be able to do to get us to a better place? The president's been clear from the beginning that what we need is, there are government actions that are underway. There's more that's being contemplated. Today's meeting with the CEOs was to focus on their responsibilities, because they are responsible. They are responsible as actors in the market, but they do have ethical and moral responsibilities. Those were underscored by the vice president, and I think those are important messages for them to hear from us.
When the internet first sort of became a thing, this was in some ways the American government gifting the world, right? I mean, it was research that was done in that sense. This is different, right? This is private sector created here, private sector driven. Should there be any extra concerns we have about that?
The parallel I see that I think is really important is these are very powerful raw technologies, but they don't come with morals or rules or values. That's our job. And that's why this administration came out with a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights last October. At a time when the technology is this powerful and this fast-moving, no more important time to be clear about your values. And that's the starting point. And then implementing the right measures on our side in the government, but also in companies, but doing it in alignment with our values. That's how we're going to navigate this.
20 and 40 years ago, if America made a set of guidelines, the world would likely follow on a new technology. That's not going to be the case anymore. What do we do about the bad actors that are also playing with this new technology?
Yeah, I think first we just have to recognize that it is a globally competitive landscape. President Biden likes to talk about how important it is for democracy to prove that it can work in today's complex world. And I think AI is just a perfect example of that complexity. But we and our like-minded allies, I think, have a lot of work to do, but a great opportunity to come together and manage these risks in a way that chart to a better future.
All right. President's Science Advisor Arati Prabhakar. Hopefully I didn't mangle that too badly. Also, of course, experience on DARPA, which essentially gave us the internet. Appreciate you coming on and explaining what the White House is up to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me bring in Jacob Ward. He's our technology correspondent here at NBC News. He's also the author of The Loop, How Technology is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. Essentially, before there was AI, there was algorithms, right? And that is essentially, I guess initial AI is probably a way to describe it. I've been waiting for the White House to come out with something, believe it or not. It feels like, where is that convening of the tech companies? And here they're trying to get there, but this feels small and late.
It does feel small. The people I've been speaking to who have been, raising the alarms on the incredible potential power of this definitely say that this is not adequate in their view. We're talking here about, a move to fund additional research. That doesn't really seem to be, funding is not something that the AI community is lacking currently.
Yeah, money's not the issue here.
Money's not the issue. We also know that they are opening up a DEF CON village kind of hackathon to try and test some of the models that are out there. I've attended these DEF CON village hackathons in the past. It's a bunch of well-meaning people, but that is it's a pretty small event as things go. Doesn't necessarily feel like something. And then, of course, the Office of Management and Budget is coming out with these guidelines around how the U.S. government can use this technology. But it is not the all-in-one regulatory kind of philosophical statement that we were looking for. And especially, it's interesting, we've been talking so much about China, right? What if China goes ahead and does something? What if Russia goes ahead and does something and leaves us behind? What's interesting, Chuck, is that China just issued a bunch of draft regulations on AI that are extremely sweeping. They say that all synthetic media needs to be watermarked. They say that you've got to make your data models transparent. They also, of course, say that those data models need to be based on pro-Chinese state, data. So there's some creepy authoritarian stuff there. But it's very interesting to see, if anything, not only are they beating us technologically, they're kind of out in front of us on regulation, too.
Let's talk about it through the prism of the tech companies. Look, the last thing they want, they never want Washington in their way. We know this. But I was thinking about the movie Contact today. I don't know if you remember that movie.
We were just watching that at my house the other day.
What I loved about it is here it was sort of how would the U.S. government handle actually a formal ability of an alien life trying to make contact. And they said, boy, we need science advisors. We need philosophers.
That's right.
And it was a little facetious, but I was thinking about that movie today after you and I were talking, going, maybe we ought to have a room where those tech execs ought to talk to sociologist on this one.
Can I tell you a story? So I was sitting once in a room full of people. I'm not allowed to say who they were, but it was a bunch of sociologists, political scientists, researchers on one side, and it was a bunch of AI people on the other side. And the AI people had been literally building this model in which they said, okay, we're going to have a fill in the blank for AI in which it's going to say it would be unethical for me to do X. And then AI is going to fill in the blank. And if we do it enough times, we're going to arrive at a set of universal human values. Do you have any questions? And this political scientist, everybody's hand goes up in the room. And this political scientist goes first, and she says, I have just 3 questions. What is universal? What is human? And what are values? Right? These machines are walking right in to some fundamental questions that we are nowhere near answering in the academic sense among political scientists, among sociologists. And the fact that these things are going to, this technology is conceivably going to utterly upend society and play on all of our human instincts when we barely understand how to get along anyway. I don't know, man. That's a lot.
Let me ask you this, though. How much of this, and this is where I do think, and we've talked about this before, I think my own level of concern on AI goes to the lack of concern we had for social media. And the internet created a lot of disruption and displacement at first. We had to rewrite laws, and a bunch of early people made money off of things that they probably weren't their rights. Like I think of how Mark Cuban made his money, something called broadcast.com. Not even sure. We hadn't decided how sports rights even work on streaming back then. He didn't do it illegally. He was
ahead of the game.
He just was ahead of the game. Today, he never would have gotten all those rights for as cheaply as he did. So we're going to have a little bit of that. Are we overreacting?
Well, I think, one thing that it struck me in the conversation you just had with Ms. Prabhakar, I have tremendous respect for her and her background. She's mentioned there that the technology companies understand that it comes with moral complications and ethical complications. What it does not come with right now is legal liability. And I think we live in a world right now where those companies literally have no legal liability in this. They are utterly protected by Section 230, and that is protecting specifically the fuel supply of AI, which is the data.
If you want to read between the lines, the fact that she said, maybe we need to relook at that. Just the fact that she opened that up, it shows you, I think that everybody realizes.
This is you reading this world better than I do.
No. She doesn't bring it up unless it isn't. I mean, the fact that she said, well, some changes have to be pondered. I mean, I think we all realize that, okay, it's like, oh, don't tax the internet. Well, what happens when all commerce goes on the internet? Oh, yeah, maybe that wasn't a good idea, right? I think that's where we're headed.
You're reading it better than I do.
We'll see.
Always fun to watch.
We'll see. Jacob Ward, good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for the state visit.
Yeah.
It's good to see you for the
Nice to see you. Thank you.
We're going to be doing a lot more this year in the very near future because Jacob's a part of an upcoming episode of our brand new season of Meet the Press Reports. By the way, that kicks off tomorrow. The first episode of Season 6 of Meet the Press Reports will air tomorrow at 10:30 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News Now. Episode 1 is focusing on a deep dive into the anti-drag movement. It's really about the anti-LGBTQ laws that have been circulating around the country. We're going to give you a sneak peek of that tomorrow right here on this show. Next week, we'll tackle the future of artificial intelligence, and that will be with Jake Ward. You can catch that episode and every episode again on Sunday mornings and on streaming via Peacock and YouTube. We'll be right back with the latest on the landmark decision in the Proud Boys seditious conspiracy trial. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
After 3 trials, we have secured the convictions of leaders of both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers for seditious conspiracy, specifically conspiring to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power. Our work will continue.
Welcome back. That was the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, just a few moments ago at the Justice Department reacting to the news today that a jury has found 4 out of 5 members of the extremist group, the Proud Boys, including leader Enrique Tarrio, guilty of seditious conspiracy for their actions around the January 6th insurrection. In the last hour, the jury did acquit a 5th member of the group on that charge. The 5th member, Dominic Pizzola, was found guilty of multiple other charges, including obstruction of an official proceeding, destruction of government property, and robbery earlier in the day. Each defendant faced 9 counts, but the jury could not reach a consensus on 2 of the counts, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. Including today's verdict, though, 14 people have now been convicted of the charge of seditious conspiracy in response to the insurrection. Essentially, the closest thing you have to essentially being tried as a traitor, being found to be a traitor to the United States. All have been members of extremist organizations, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So let's unpack this. Ryan Riley is NBC News' justice reporter. He's been breaking down these convictions all day. So seditious conspiracy was something that the Justice Department knew was going to be hard to prove, and they got 4 out of 5. Why did so many legal scholars thought it was going to be so difficult to prove? We saw this insurrection. We kind of, I mean, there's part of me that says that they're like, well, stand back and stand by. Here they were. They tried to stop, and yet a lot of legal scholars thought this was going to be difficult. What made it so difficult?
I mean, it's a really high bar I think you have to reach in order to find the conclusion of seditious conspiracy. And, a lot of the evidence was more about that moment, about this moment, this being sort of spontaneous right before the attack that a lot of this took place, although there's a lot of this that sort of dates back. And you remember the Proud Boys came in November and December, but then they were mostly going back and forth with members of Antifa. It wasn't, necessarily trying to topple the government at that point. But, on January 6th, when, after Mike Pence was a traitor in their minds, right, after that moment that Mike Pence said he wasn't going to overturn the election, that is really when a switch got flipped, I think, for a lot of people here. But, if you want to go back a little further, it was Trump's Will Be Wild tweet on December 19th, 2020 that really set a lot of this off. That's what brought the Proud Boys to D.C. That's what brought all these extremist groups to D.C. And then, if you have a bunch of people who think the election is stolen and you send them in one direction, it's kind of inevitable it's going to happen.
Has anybody been convicted successfully of seditious conspiracy that wasn't a member of the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers?
Not thus far. Yeah.
Was being a member of those groups, I mean, it almost, you couldn't get the charge if you weren't, because the theory is, well, those groups intended to came to D.C. with the intention of disruption.
Yeah, and I mean, being in a group is an essential part of a conspiracy charge, right? You can't just get popped on sedition alone necessarily, right? You have to get a charge of, you have to be in this conspiracy with other people, so that, and by definition sort of leads you towards more organized groups. So, there are other groups that could potentially get these charged, but the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were the main ones that were really involved on January 6th.
Should we read anything into the fact that this charge was successful in front of a jury of seditious conspiracy, then if the former president is charged with essentially inciting this, he's the one that called for them to come, does this mean that this makes that charge easier to make?
It does, and I think the implications for Trump are definitely significant, because remember, the head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, who was found guilty of seditious conspiracy here. In my book, honestly, I thought he would be the toughest one to convict. If I were on that jury...
because he was also an FBI source, apparently, at times?
He was an MPD source, yes. But it was more because he was not there, right? He was off-site. He was in a Baltimore hotel.
Well, he got kicked out.
Correct.
Because the police, he was booted from the city, correct?
Yeah, and that was what the FBI did is sort of intervene, I guess, right? They sort of took this lone wolf approach to this entire January 6th incident and started to pick off extremists that they thought were, but they weren't really considering that just having a massive mob is going to be the major threat here. They were just trying to take out the individual actors.
So the FBI thought if they took out the leaders that somehow that was going to dissipate the attack.
Right, and did not have, and I don't think that, that's basically what we've, seen since is that they're not prepared enough. But, remember, Enrique Tarrio is at that Baltimore hotel, which is, I think, what has that implication for these broader cases. Because if you can convict somebody who was not on the scene of the crime, who was in a Baltimore hotel, it's a lot closer than a Baltimore hotel as the White House.
What does it say, though, that the FBI was worried enough about the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers that they thought, well, let's at least see if we can decapitate the leadership in some way, physically, not decapitate in the technical sense, but obviously remove them from their leadership position.
Yeah.
That implies that they're perhaps, as we're trying to figure out they were onto this more than maybe even they've let on.
Yeah, I mean, the raw intelligence was there for sure. It wasn't organized. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I think one of them is just, frankly, it was over the Christmas break, right? Federal employees aren't really ramping up over the few weeks. And I think that is one of the reasons that we saw what happened on January 6th.
I think it's a very fair point and observation. Ryan Riley, big day at Justice. Thanks very much. After the break, another shakeup in the 2024 Senate map. I'm going to talk to Maryland's longtime Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, whose retirement announcement just opened the door for a crowded and likely hotly contested Democratic primary contest. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Democrats are in for another crowded intra-party battle for a key Senate seat in 2024. In recent weeks, we've already begun to see the fight heat up in California, where three well-financed Democratic House members, Barbara Lee, Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, already are all duking it out to fill the seat of retiring Senator Dianne Feinstein. And now in Maryland, we also expect a robust Democratic primary in the race to succeed Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, who announced this week that he's going to retire from politics after 5 decades in it. Maryland Democratic Congressman David Trone, who is the founder of Total Beverage and Wine, as well as Montgomery County Councilmember Will Jawando, have already thrown their hats in the ring. We expect many more hats to follow, although a lot of things could move depending on what happens with other potential candidates, including Jamie Raskin. But joining me now for a little bit of a remembrance, if you will, his take on things, is Maryland's senior Democratic Senator then Cardin. Senator Cardin, do I say congratulations? I mean, I don't know. What have been, is it condolences or congratulations? Which do you prefer?
Well, Chuck, first of all, thank you very much. I think it's a recognition that I will have served for 58 consecutive years as a legislator. It's time for me to look for other ways to help our community. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to be here very actively for the next 2 years and then look for other ways I can help our community. But it's time for new people to come in, and I think a healthy primary is good. I think it's great that people are interested.
You know, it's interesting. We were doing the numbers. Apparently, Maryland's only had 6 senators in the last 50 years. There's a lot of stability that comes with a Maryland Senate seat. Let me ask you this. A robust primary can come with a lot of positives. What are you most concerned about a big primary doing?
Well, I would hope that it will be positive. It's very important that Maryland maintain its Democratic member of the United States Senate for the balance of power in the United States Senate. So I hope those that are running recognize that the real prize is November, not just the primary election. And I must tell you that the names that have been floated, I think they're all sensitive to that.
You know, when I think about Maryland politics, you know, when I first started covering Maryland politics, the more Baltimore you had in your resume, the better. Over the last 20 years, the more D.C. suburbs sometimes, the better. I'm curious your take and whether Maryland's political identity for you still is more at the Baltimore Harbor, or is it more in Montgomery County?
It's the entire state of Maryland from the beaches to the shore. I love the state of Maryland. My roots are in Baltimore. It is, when you look at the 4 statewide state officials in Maryland, 2 have roots in Baltimore, and 2 have roots in the Washington area. So I think both the Baltimore and Washington urban centers are rich with population, for particularly Democrats, but I represent the entire state of Maryland.
Let me ask you a few questions that are coming up. I want to specifically talk today about the situation with the Supreme Court and, frankly, where I think the United States Senate, of which you've been a member of for quite some time, bears some responsibility for the makeup of a Supreme Court that the public just doesn't trust anymore. How do we reform the judiciary?
Well, quite frankly, they need an ethics standard. This is outrageous, the most recent revelations. It is shocking to me that they do not have the basic disclosure laws and standards that are pretty common sense, and that has clearly been violated by the Supreme Court. I think Congress has the ability to respond to that. I think we should respond to it, and I know that the Judiciary Committee in the Senate is looking at that.
How do we take the partisanship, though, out of the judiciary? My thesis is the minute we lowered the threshold to 50 votes for all judges, we made those robes red and blue. They no longer are black. And you know, that to me has been the unintended consequence of, quote, getting through this process faster and all of that. How do we take the partisanship out if we don't raise the voting threshold?
Well, I think it was a major mistake to lower the threshold from 60 to 50 for the Supreme Court appointments.
Don't you think it was a mistake all over? I mean, I understand you saying that exception because it was a Democrat that lowered the threshold for the lower courts. It was a Republican that lowered the threshold for the upper court. Why has this been good for any of the courts?
Well, it's interesting. Before we lowered the threshold, it was unheard of to filibuster a Supreme Court nominee. We allowed it to have an up or down vote. As you know, Justice Thomas was confirmed with less than 60 votes. We should not be using these partisan tools to block the selection and confirmation of judicial nominees. I would just point out the way that President Trump submitted his nominees, in some cases not even allowing Democrats to interview the nominees, was outrageous. It was very partisan. It was a restricted list. I think it's not just the confirmation process in the Senate. It's the way that the Trump administration politicized the appointments to the Supreme Court to a level that we had never seen before.
I understand that, but I've talked to members of Bush's White House counsel's office who said, boy, had the threshold been 50 and not 60, it would have been an entirely different set of nominees. They would have even offered the Senate. So we really have remade the judiciary in a more political, activist way that I don't think was the intention.
I think we should be appointing judges who are not going to be with a partisan agenda, whether it's a Democrat or Republican.
But how do you do that if you
completely.
have a 50-vote threshold? Don't you, I mean, isn't the irony that without the 60 votes, that is what forced, essentially compromise on this?
Chuck, I would hope that we would have leadership in the White House and the leadership in the United States Senate that recognizes this and calls a truce to these partisan nominations. No question Donald Trump took it to a new low level. We've got to restore that. I think the 60-vote threshold would help, but quite frankly, I think majority rules. I think we can work on a 50-vote threshold and still be able to achieve an independent judiciary, because quite frankly, as a Democrat, I want an independent judiciary. I don't want a partisan judiciary, even if we can control those appointments.
Let me ask you about the debt ceiling. You've been through many a fiscal crisis. You're a veteran of many a fiscal crisis. I hear, and I know you and your colleagues have been talking about how ridiculous all this is, and yet we go through this process over and over, whether, arguably Democrats had control of Congress and could have changed the rules of how the debt ceiling is even dealt with, a negative resolution or something like that. Why allow this to sit out there as a tool to be weaponized?
Well, it shouldn't be a tool to be weaponized. We should take the paying of our debt and default off the table. It should not be an issue. If we approve the appropriation bills and then we incur the debt, we should pay our bills, and there shouldn't require any additional action of Congress in order for that to take place. We've made some suggestions to do that. I've been have suggested some. We should remove this altogether. We have enough leverage on each political party during the appropriation process. Use that. Don't the United States.
At this point, though, the president, should he be sitting down with Speaker McCarthy?
I think not on the budget for next year, but certainly let's get this debt issue behind us on default. It should not be. We should not use that threat, a gun at our heads, literally, on paying our bills. That we don't want to reward that, and we don't have the bill that passed the House is not a bill that even allows us any opportunity to talk in any rational way. And President Biden has already submitted his spending plan for this year, his budget. Let's sit down and talk about that, but not whether we're going to pay our bills.
Final question. Look, you're a year younger than President Biden. He's seeking re-election. You've chosen not to. There's been a lot of chatter about age limits in the federal government, whether it's Supreme Court, whether it's the Senate, considering the situation with Senator Feinstein. I'm curious, do you have a personal opinion on that? You think there should be some sort of limit?
No, I don't think there should be an age limit. I was looking at, of course, a 6-year term. President Biden's looking at a 4-year term. So it's a different length of commitment. But I think each person has to make their own judgments, and the voters should have that choice. So, no, I don't think there should be an age limit.
At the end of the day, the voters can decide whether or not you're up to the job, right?
Absolutely.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, been there a long time. Good to see you. I know I'm going to see you again before the term is over. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
Still to come, abortion battles in battleground states. We're live in Wisconsin, where the arguments have begun in a case that is likely going to end up before the state's newly left-leaning Supreme Court, challenging the state's 170-year-old abortion ban. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. With the Dobbs decision, it means abortion is being fought in the states, and the battle of abortion rights in Wisconsin is where things are heated up today. Today, a Wisconsin court heard oral arguments in a lawsuit that's likely to end up overturning the state's 19th century era abortion ban. It's a trigger law that went into place after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Wisconsin's governor and attorney general say the law conflicts with newer, less restrictive laws. Dasha Burns joins me from Madison, Wisconsin, with more on today's hearing. And Dasha, the real question I have is, everybody I've talked to, we expect to see this new court overturn it. The question is, what becomes the law? I know former Governor Scott Walker assumes it's the law he signed, which would make it 20 weeks. But I am curious, where does this go once they decide this 19th century law is no longer enforceable?
Well, it's a good question, Chuck, and I don't have a great answer for you. And that's been at the heart of the confusion ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned. We've seen this in Wisconsin. We've seen this in Michigan with their 1931 law. Basically, any state that had sort of these archaic laws on the books or conflicting or contradictory laws on the books have been in this gray area, this confusing area where doctors, where women seeking this kind of care have been unclear about what's okay, what's not okay, and what the future is going to look like. And as you know, we've seen these battles play out. They're not simple, and they take a long time. And so right now, you know, today we saw these arguments play out in the Dane County District Court. And while what happened today, you know, is of course significant, the reason it's important is because, as you said there, we expect it to head to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And what happened today is one step closer to making that most expensive judicial race in U.S. history closer to paying off for proponents of abortion rights, because this summer the justice-elect Janice Protasiewicz is going to be sworn in, and she is likely to repeal that law. But what happens after that? That's still a big question mark. And whether you talk to abortion rights proponents or anti-abortion rights advocates, the thing that everyone's looking for right now is some clarity and it's probably going to be a while before we have it, Chuck.
It is. Like I said, the best I could come up with in an answer from various experts I talked to appears to be 20 weeks, but we shall see. Dasha Burns on the ground force in Madison. Dasha, thank you. And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Garrett Hake, who's sitting in for Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.